military briefing. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to be all over the map. So it's going to be a little different. But I hope that you'll enjoy it. So the talk today is about a company called Aircore Aviation that I'm very familiar with. It's a family company. But I wanted to talk about different stories that some of you know about, and some of you might hear for the first time, that created or inspired that company to come into being. So here's a picture of, this is actually an outdated picture. It's a year old. Currently, the company up in Bemidji, Minnesota has 82 people full-time. So this is a year old. And okay, so here, this is my third brother, Eric, managing partner, along with his other partners, Eric Trueblood, Mark Tisler, and Dan Matichek, who started the company about 10 years ago. And then I have a second brother, Stefan, that's this guy right here, and then a fourth brother, Chad, right next to him. So there's four of us brothers, and of the four, I'm the only one that doesn't technically work for Aircore, but I'm an interested party, so I'll tell you everything I know about it today. So this is a quick bio on me. Pilot for Delta Airlines 330. I fly all over the world in the Airbus 330. Worked as a director of flight operations for Wings Over the North Museum, and working now with Fagan Fighter Museum out in Granite Falls. Some of you are familiar with that museum. Commemorative Air Force pilot, and I've started a new endeavor as their education director. And in a nutshell, we're trying to build from scratch a youth program. Our aviation organization, like many that you're involved with probably, are starting to realize, looking around the room, the mean age of everybody in the room is about 82 years old. And what are we going to do 10 years from now if we don't get serious about getting kids involved in aviation? And hopefully we can do the same thing with this organization too, because I'm looking around to see if there's anyone younger than I in here. That's kind of the same thing. I'm a steerman, pilot, owner, and fixer. Some of you know that story, so I could tell you more about that later. One of the vaunted historians in this room, Jim Johns, a few weeks ago, talked about the Tokyo Raiders and the impact that they had locally, and how they had an impact on myself as a kid, learning about them. So later on, you'll see I went to school and had the chance to meet the Tokyo Raiders because they used to have reunions at the school that I went to. And at the time, as a young lad, I didn't realize the opportunity I was being afforded to sit in the room with these guys. And Jim talked about attending air shows with these guys and how special that was. So that's what they mean to me. We'll talk a little bit more about that. This is Lieutenant Don Lopez. He was in the CBI theater, so we're starting back here in World War II. 14th Air Force, 23rd Fighter Group, 75th Fighter Squadron. And he flew 101 missions and shot down 5 aircraft. 4 of them were in a P-40, which was named Lobes Hope 1. And then he had another P-51C model before this one. And then this is Lobes Hope number 3, where he shot down his 4th aircraft, one in a P-51. Here's a graphic of what his airplane looked like. Lobes Hope, short for Lopez. That's where that comes from. He was, you can see, some of you might be familiar with this here, Flying Tigers. This unit came from the ABG, so this was their lineage, and they were, like say, in the CBI theater. So here in Naval Air Station MSB, we had Ensign George Bush, who was learning to fly early in the war, and he was one of the youngest naval aviators at the time. This is a picture of him in his brand new ensign outfit and his flying suit there. We know he must have soloed. You know why? because he's wearing his goggles on his forehead. That was a rite of passage. If you hadn't soloed yet, you'd have to wear them around your neck so everybody knew that you hadn't soloed yet. Once you soloed, you were allowed to wear it on your forehead. So that's how we know that. He soloed in January of 42. I think it was like 23 degrees. And had an opportunity to talk to a flight surgeon about what was that like. They let guys fly in the winter, and the flight surgeon said, yeah, I'd come out each day, and as long as nobody got frostbite, we'd keep going. If somebody got frostbite, then we'd shut down for the day. So they didn't slow down the training. And this is what he soloed in 2S2 Stearman. And this is an airplane that, one of the first airplanes that Air Corps Aviation restored. And it is actually a documented aircraft that when George Bush opened his logbooks a few years back, guys were scrambling to see if their tail number matched some of the pages in the logbook. And this one was a project that was down in Missouri. A guy by the name of Bob Hood had a huge collection of Stearman parts, and this was one of them. So, and this airplane was at the Wings of the North Museum, and thankfully is staying in town because a couple of acquaintances of mine bought the airplane from its previous owner, and it's going to stay in the area. So that's one of our ones that we're proud of here. And here he is later on in the TBM Avenger, along with his crew members there. Some of you know the story of they didn't make it on one of his missions, flying into Chichijima. So.
Shawn, where's that plane going to stay?
It'll, as far as I know, it'll be out in Eden Prairie. So yeah, that's the latest. It could move around, but the guys who bought it are local guys. So yeah, so we hope to see it more. Over in Europe, we had an airplane here by the name of Callahan in Bassingbourn, England. Some of you I've told the story of going to find this airfield as a Delta pilot flying to London. It's kind of it's a cute story. I won't tell it now, but I'll tell you later if you want to hear it. But anyway, they were at Bassingbourn, England, just north of London, 91st Bomb Group. Why does this picture matter to me? Because when I was young, I built a model, and the model, monogram, 148 scale model, and it was Callahan. So I read everything I could and was very interested in that. And so this is a picture of that crew, and I can rattle off the names of all the crew members, but I won't do it for you right now. Over in the Pacific, Major Bill Dunham was a P-47 pilot. Grew up in Washington and started out in a 348 Fighter Squadron in Port Moresby, Australia. Then later on, in October of 43, he transferred to the 342nd Fighter Squadron and was based in Dabudura, which we saw on the map a couple weeks ago. And his nickname was Bill Dingy Dunham. Kind of an interesting call sign, if you will. And the way he got that nickname was December 7th, 1944, third anniversary of Pearl Harbor. He was out for bear that day because they had been getting reports of Japanese pilots shooting pilots up in their chutes, and he was after them that day. And he, in the process, they were supporting the invasion of Ormond Bay, and he shot down 2 Kates and 2 Oscars. And the 4th airplane he shot down, the pilot bailed out, and he decided, I'm gonna return the favor, and he lined up on him. And as he described it later, he said he felt the hand of God put his hand on his shoulder and say, "Don't do it." And then he saw the pilot land in the water, and he noticed that the guy didn't have a life jacket or a dinghy. And so he swooped down, and if you think about this, they wore their life jacket underneath their parachute. So imagine you're flying a P-47 and you're undoing your parachute, trying to get that life jacket over your head. If you think about, you know, the risk that he took as a pilot, he tossed it out and doesn't know what happened after that, but he was known for a lot of years for that act of mercy. So, interesting story. And he has 2 daughters. He had 2 daughters. And when asked why he did that, he said, you know, that Japanese pilot maybe had a daughter at home waiting for him. So, kind of a neat story. There's the airplane he flew. Again, based in New Guinea. And 460th Fighter Squadron. So, this is the latest airplane that Air Corps Aviation has restored. And it's painted in his markings. As far as did he actually fly this particular airplane, there's about a 50% chance that he actually flew this particular airplane, because all we know about the airplane was that it remained in New Guinea because it had a landing accident. One of the gear collapsed, so they bulldozed it into the jungle. And that's why it survived, because the flying ones at the end of the war left, and this one stayed in the jungle for 70 years, and then was recovered by a recovery guy out of Sydney, Australia. And we went over to Australia in 2010 and put this airplane and another airplane that I'll talk about into 4 shipping containers, and it came back to Bemidji, Minnesota. And the restoration was halted for a while, up until about 3 years ago, when Air Corps got real serious about restoring it. Now we're going to go to Saipan over in the Pacific, and this is an airplane, B-29, and some of you may have seen the t-shirt over there with the nose art on it, little gem. And this guy in the picture is U.S. Marine Randall Springer, and he's actually kind of well known, not for him, but for his artwork. He was actually a commercial artist from Chicago, and the first piece of art, nose art, that he painted, he got notoriety real fast. Can you paint my airplane? Can you paint my airplane? And I think he charged decent money for it, because they were good. So here's a color picture of it, kind of neat. I'm not sure if this is an actual color picture, or if it's just been colorized, but it really shows you the detail and the gem and the gal, scantily clad gal there.
Do you have that painting on the nose of your 330?
No, but I'm thinking of putting it on my Stearman, actually. I like it. Here's another one, Waddy's Wagon. And the guy these guys are reenacting the painting on the side of the airplane. So this is another one that Springer did. Waddy was a All-American end for Oklahoma. Big guy in the front there. He looks like a football player. So this was another one. And this was 479th bomb wing. And their tail code was A-Box, and then underneath they'd have the airplane number. So A-Box 41 or A-Box 45. Just like the B-17s, they had tail codes. At this time, there was another well-known pilot that just finished his tour at Basenborn and had a movie made about him. Anybody know who this is? Bob Morgan, yeah. So he had first crew to fly 25 missions in Europe, and then he went over to the Pacific, and his airplane there was Dauntless Dottie. And this artwork was a little simpler, but also painted by Springer. So Morgan is over here now, towards the end of the war, flying B-29s. Here's Little Gem, and its first crew. Captain Archer was the aircraft commander. And then here's the second crew. And this is the crew that matters to me, because that's my dad's uncle, Stub Belshaw from Montevideo, Minnesota. And he was a flight engineer on this airplane. Aircraft commander here. Interestingly enough, I grew up listening to Stubb tell stories about flying B-29s on a Saipan. And he had a lot of pictures. And what was interesting was, a lot of them were Little Gem, but there were a lot of other airplanes that he flew on, based on the nose arc. And I asked him about that. And he said, yeah, our aircraft commander was Jewish, and they discriminated against him. They gave him the spare. They wouldn't give him an airplane. And he said it was a major pain for the aircraft commander. It was a real pain for me because my dad's Uncle Stubb was a flight engineer. And some of you guys know that every airplane's a little bit different. And he'd get into another airplane and throttle position was a little different. How each engine started was a little different. So the aircraft commander had a little chip on his shoulder for understandable reasons. It's also interesting to me, these guys are wearing Army Air Corps hats. Any Marines in the room recognize that hat? That's a Marine hat. And I wonder if he was maybe paying homage to the 3,000 Marines that were killed, 13,000 that were injured taking the island of Saipan, for the sole reason so that we could get B-29s to Japan. When we finally marched up the islands and got to Saipan, we could finally reach most of Japan, especially Tokyo. Yeah?
What's the date on this picture?
The date here, 22 March of 45. Yeah, see it on the bottom there? I assume that's correct for the picture. So, the reason I know a lot about the commander is I became his pen pal when I was 10 years old. We wrote back and forth, so that's how I know a lot of this inside baseball information. So, also, by the way, he ran a pretty tight ship, and he was not friendly with the crew. And I didn't hear that from him, but I learned that from my relative Stubb. And there's some interesting stories about that. One of which was this guy here was the youngest member of the crew, and he was, actually, it was either this guy or that guy, but anyway, he was tail gunner. And the day they were shipping overseas from Kearney, Nebraska, his mother walked him up to the aircraft commander hand in hand and said, "You better bring my boy home safe." So imagine a 22-year-old with that level of responsibility. Big deal. After the war, we had a well-known movie star named Jimmy Stewart, who, as a lot of you know, flew B-24s, so he was a bomber guy. But he wanted to get into air racing after the war. So he got an airplane here that never went overseas. It's not a combat airplane. It was built here, of course, but it never went overseas, never made it at the end of the war. And it's actually a C fuselage with a D wing. So it's a Frankenstein airplane, but they built it to race. And it was designed to enter the 1949 Bendix cross-country air race. And the pilot, Joe DeBona, entered in 48 and made it almost all the way and got low on fuel. He had a headwind and he had to land for gas, and he didn't win in 48. So in 49, they were going to win that race. This picture here shows all the extra junk that they took off the airplane to lighten it up for air racing. Brakes, ADF, antenna cover, and just all the stuff they took out of the airplane to make it a racer, make it fast. Besides the winning the Bendix Air Race in 1949, this airplane also did something very interesting. Some of you're going to have to fact check me on the year when Queen Elizabeth was coronated, 48, 49, somewhere, 53, okay? The American TV stations wanted to have live coverage of that. Well, they still were not able to get live coverage of that. So there was movie film of the coronation, and a Canberra bomber flew from England, let's see, I think it went to Iceland, and then this airplane took off, went to Iceland, picked up the film canisters, put it in the back, flew like a bat out of hell back to Boston, and they got it on broadcast TV at 5 o'clock that night. So it wasn't live, but it was about as close as you can get. So this airplane flew the film of the Queen's coronation. There's the racer in the cockpit there, and the ground crew, and there's the owner, Jimmy Stewart. So little known facts about Jimmy Stewart there. He's later sold it to, anybody know who this is? Jackie Cochran, yeah, and Jackie Cochran flew it in air races and demo and air shows for a long time. So, hey, there's a picture of me. I am in junior high, and I am talking to a judge at the Minnesota State Fair. And when I was a young guy, having listened to stories of my dad's uncles and my family, got interested in World War II aviation. That's when I bought that B-17 model, built a diorama of it. This is actually the second year. That's actually a P-61 Black Widow, for those of you that are watching close. But my judge was a Northwest Airlines pilot, made a big impression on me, and he was also a pilot in the Minnesota wing of the Commemorative Air Force. So after the judging was over, he walked over to my family, said, "It seems like your son is kind of passionate about these World War II airplanes. You guys might want to come over to Fleming Field in South St. Paul and look at our museum. You might be interested in that." Yeah, very much so. So we ended up doing that and made a big impression on me. And at that time, they were well into the restoration process of B-25 Miss Mitchell. So myself and my younger two brothers at the time crawled all through it, and it sparked a lot of inspiration in us. So thanks, Jim, for being involved in that.
Is that Ron Vandervoort?
It's Ron Vandervoort. Nice job. That's Ron. A couple years later, my family took a trip out to Washington, out to Baltimore, because my uncle was in medical school at Johns Hopkins. And we took a day to go visit, do the tourist thing to DC. And we found I'll call it a gypsy cab guy that had an old van that would drive you around different stops and drop you off. And one of the stops that I was most interested in was the National Air and Space Museum. National Air and Space Museum opened in 1976. It is undergoing a renovation that started 3 years ago. Reason being is that museum was getting threadbare and worn from traffic. Did you know that the National Air and Space Museum is the most visited museum on the face of the earth? People have always been interested in aviation and always will be. So anyway, we stopped there in the morning. It was only a 1 hour time frame, which is just not enough. That's like going to Oshkosh for the afternoon. And I had a long face, and I was walking out, and the van driver said to my mother, "You know, we can leave him here and we can go to the other monuments." And before I let my mom give the answer, I shot back in and I spent the rest of the day in the National Air and Space Museum. So made a big impression on me. So here's a high school graduation picture of myself and my brother Stefan. And again, going back to this picture here, learning about World War II and flying was a big thing for me, and what got me fascinated and interested in military aviation and that. Like also, that experience with the Minnesota wing of the Commemorative Air Force made a huge impact on me. And what I didn't realize is it made an even bigger impression on my third brother, Eric. As I was sitting in the cockpit making airplane noises, pretending I was flying that bomber, he was down looking at rivets and hydraulic systems and asking the mechanics questions. He was interested in how things work and how they're built. Made a huge impression on him. Here's Eric, brother number 3, and brother number 4, Chad, in high school. And by this time, I had decided that I needed to get an education to become a pilot. And so I went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and there I am getting my diploma from the Honorable William Jefferson Clinton. I give him credit because a week before graduation, there was rumors that he wasn't going to stand for all the graduates. And I had a problem. I was in Squadron 31. So by the time my squadron stood up, he would have already shaken a lot of hands. So we figured, yeah, he'll shake hands of the first few guys and then sit down. Give him credit, he shook the hands of all 989 graduates. And by the way, I did graduate in the top 89% of my class too, I'll just let you know. But you know what they call the guy who graduates last? Sir. There's a hero shot of me in the Air Force. Here's the Bush Stearman, the first, so my younger brother Eric then kind of followed in my footsteps, but went down the maintenance path. And his first start in fabrication and sheet metal was with another company in Bemidji, Minnesota called Bemidji Aviation. And what they do is they have a fleet of Queen Airs that fly contract freight for UPS. So they fly into the small towns, they bring the freight into the big airport here, it goes on the big brown UPS airplane out. And so he got his early experience. There was a vocational class in high school, and you could program, and you could go to classes in the morning and in the afternoon work at a local business. So he worked at the local airport, and he was getting his experience towards his A&P by doing that. And great opportunity that is not as known about as much anymore, and probably not the same path that a lot of people do. But by the time he graduated high school, then he had 2 years experience, continued to work there for another year, and had his A&P license by the time he was 20, 21, or 19, I'm sorry, and then inspection authorization a couple years later. Then he later came down to the Twin Cities and worked for Executive Aviation and worked on projects there. And then in the late 90s, he got a call from, his work was getting noticed by somebody. And this guy was a nephew of Ron Fagan out in Granite Falls, Minnesota. And he got a call from Ron and said, I've got a P-40 project. Do you think you could do that for me? Sure. So out to Granite Falls he went. He was out there for 3-4 years. And then started up his own entity after that, after working with Ron at Fagan Fighters. So got Ron's shop up and running out there, and now they're on their own here. So this is the start of the Bush Stearman restoration, showing the covering on a rotisserie so you can turn the airplane around. This is showing the frame before it's covered. There's what the frame and landing gear look like before restoration. There's the wing. It's a wood wing. I think someday I want to figure out a way to cover a Stearman in clear plastic so that everybody can appreciate the fine art that's underneath all that fabric. I just think it's beautiful. So, wood wing. There's in any project, whether it's a metal airplane or a fabric airplane or metal frame, fixtures are a huge part. So you need guys that can weld and measure precisely to make fixtures, or jigs as they're commonly called, to keep this fuselage, like most of the Stearman out there, had a former life as a crop duster. So it had hit a few stumps and gopher mounds and ditches and telephone poles and wires, and so it had some straightening that needed to be done and re-welding. So that's what's going on here. There's the horizontal floor covering. Then about 4 years ago, they started on Lope's Hope P-51C. This is a cool picture. This is Don Lopez's son. and granddaughter visiting, looking at Grandpa's airplane. So they made the trek to Bemidji to see the project. There's Don in, it's probably about 2000 or so. See, he's still got his Flying Tigers CBI jacket on there. So Don stayed in the Air Force after the war, went in different positions, and then when the Air and Space Museum opened in 1976, he was the assistant director of the Air and Space Museum. So, thank you, Don. Here's some pictures of the P-51C, Loeb's Hope. Again, you can see welded frame fixture here to do the entire wing, all one piece. Air Corps, people ask, how do you figure out how to build this type of stuff? You have the airplane, and you have plans, and you have information on how the airplane puts together, but how do you figure out this part of it? And what Air Corps does is they look at old pictures and old magazines and old documents that talk about the manufacturing process and equipment that North American used, and they copy it. Why reinvent the wheel? They figured out how to make a lot of them quickly and efficiently. So they do a lot of research on that part of it, on not only the airplane and who flew them, but how to make the equipment and the things to restore the airplane. There's a neat picture of the cockpit of Loeb's Hope, back when the instruments were thrown at the paddle, not in any particular order. This is kind of a neat picture. Anybody recognize the airplane? At first I thought it was P-47, but then I realized it's not big enough for a P-47, and I don't see a big supercharger under the bottom. Anybody know what it is? There's a hint. What's that? Yeah, it's a Zero. So they were doing some work on the Zero here for a customer. Interesting, different color of the anti-corrosion paint and different construction techniques. So here you can see oodles and oodles of Cleco clamps that hold together sheet metal in the process of restoration as you're filing and sanding and shaping and bending and getting everything to fit. So, and there's the finished airplane, Loeb's Hope, black tail, kind of a neat paint scheme. And there's Don's marker with his long Air Force career. And then the latest project that Air Corps was involved in was P-47 Bonnie. And this is the day of the first test flight. Before the, and this is about 23 or 22 days before Oshkosh this summer. So we're down to the wire. If you look real close at the airplane, much like some of you are familiar with Sierra Sioux P-51, you'll see different colored rivets all over the airplane. That's one of the questions we get a lot. How come all the rivets are different color? And that's because Republic, along with North American, along with all the other manufacturers, had 18 to 23 different rivet providers around the country. And they wanted them each to have a unique color, that they anodized them a unique color, so that if rivets started popping out of the airplane, they'd know who to go back on. So each company has a specific color that Eric could tell you what each color is. I can't, but that's why you see different colored rivets. And at the factory, they didn't discriminate. They just poured them in a bucket as they arrived, and the workers just grabbed them out of the bucket. They didn't take any time worrying about whether they were all in line. So it was a total random arrangement of rivets. So Air Corps does the same thing. They just shake up a 5-gallon bucket, hand it to their sheet metal guy, and that's how they go on. Some another question is, what are all these lines all over the airplane? The P-47 employed a lot of spot welding, okay? And spot welding is faster in a manufacturing process. It zips airplanes together faster, but the setup time of the spot welding machine takes longer. So it's kind of a trade-off. If you have a skilled riveter, they're gonna zip an airplane out faster than a newer spot welder. But once a spot welder gets set up, it's fast. And the other part of it is, and for those of you who don't know what spot welding is, you're just basically pressing two electrodes together, passing electricity through them, and it melts the metal together, fuses it. That's how a spot welder works. But one of the bugaboos with spot welding is if you have any corrosion on the sheet metal, it changes the setup and it doesn't get a good weld. So in the factory, they just had a wire with a rag on it, and they dip in a can of muriatic acid and just run a line, and that muriatic acid would eat off the corrosion, and then they zap it, and they didn't bother to polish it up or make it look nice after that. So that's what all those lines are that you see on there. There it is on the first test flight. You can see that this is about a week before Oshkosh, and northern Minnesota was suffering from the fires in Canada, and we were extremely worried that it wasn't going to make it to Oshkosh. The Friday that they wanted to go, it was IFR. They were thinking they were going to have a Pathfinder drag the airplane to Oshkosh IFR, which wasn't probably the best thing to do with a brand new airplane first long flight. So you can see the smoke in the air. That's the north shore of Lake Bemidji underneath there. And then the day after the test flight, I went to North Dakota to get painted in the colors. That's what it looked like when it was found in Australia. And that's what it looked like before they ceremoniously popped up on that pedestal. So you notice little squares cut out everywhere. These ones are pretty big. On the other side, they were just little tiny 2-inch by 3-inch squares. We wondered what that was all about. Later found out that the natives cut it out, took a palm tree, polished it up, and used it for fishing lures. So that's what that's all about. Thankfully, they kind of knew where the bulkheads were, so they didn't zap into the bulkhead. So it wasn't like the worst thing that could have happened to it. So kind of interesting. There it is up on the tail up engine run. Other projects that are going on. We're doing an AT-10. Some of you know the AT-11 is the metal version of this that they used in World War II for multi-engine training, and navigator training, and bombardier training. They figured out that maybe we could save war materials if we just have the front of the airplane aluminum and have the rest of it wood. So it's a semi-monocoque wood fuselage there, and there's what it looks like inside. So that's a very interesting project going on. That is the end of the PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to real quick show this summer we were at Oshkosh, and we were really fortunate to have the daughters of Bill Dunham show up, be honored for the airplane debut.
Now they've built over 16,000 of these, is that right?
Well, 16,000 P-47s are all models.
Okay.
The D versions, there was something like 8,000, about half of those were Razorbacks.
Okay.
This is the last Razorback model, the D-23.
Heaviest single engine fighter that we used in World War II.
This is Chuck Craven, historian
We'll get more into
for
details
Air
later.
Corps.
But for right now, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce and just say,
And this
okay,
is the owner.
how did we get it? Where did it come from?
Bruce.
And why did we get it?
Why? Well,
the why is just, it's a long list of warbirds that I fantasized about ever since I was a kid. Like many of you, I had a father that was in World War II, and all my buddies growing up, you know, they had dads that were in World War II, and so we built the models and dreamed about those planes. And with a lot of encouragement from Warren Peach at the Dakota Territorial Air Museum, he encouraged me to develop an interest in P-47 Thunderbirds. And,
You want the real story?
And, I'm sorry?
I didn't say.
Oh, yeah.
I said, you want the real story? Warren made him do it.
Yeah, you made it. But the thing that really attracted to me to it, besides very liking the plane, is that I like bringing the planes back. And I think that the P-47 was a plane that, in terms of my experience, was not really recognized as much as it should have been. And there were so few of them left. Very few of them really survived all the scrapping of planes after the end of the war and stuff, and especially the early models, the Razorbacks. And so when we decided to start looking for one, we heard of this one that had been pulled out of Papua New Guinea. And this one actually was found by a local who happened to be a Papua New Guinea Vietnam War vet, but that was living on a farm in Papua New Guinea. And he pulled this out of the bush and, ironically enough, cut the turbocharger out of it and hooked it up to a tractor engine and used it to melt nickel and copper for whatever he was doing, and was going to take the rest of the plane out, and was stopped by a bunch of other locals that were armed with machetes and guns, who said, "You can't do this, you can't take this out of here." And a couple days later, it showed up on its nose as a gate guard at the local airport. And that's where it sat for quite a number of years until Rob Greinert out of New South Wales in Australia acquired it in 1998, brought it to Australia. And from there, teaming up with Air Corps Aviation, we went over there and had an epic trip and visited the plane, and eventually packed it up in shipping containers in 2010. I think it was the fall of 2010. In 2011, then it came over to Air Corps Aviation shop up in Bemidji, Minnesota.
Okay,
Although I do
there was a
remember
P-47 pilot
that
in Bemidji.
if anyone's seen pictures of what this thing looked like when we brought it, packed it up, I put my hand on Eric's shoulder when we were in Australia, and I said, "Are you sure we can build this plane back up out of this?" And so along, yes, 11 years, 12 years later, here it is. And so it's a great tribute to Air Corps Aviation and their skill and commitment to bringing these planes back again. So thanks to those guys.
Thank you, Air Corps. Thank you, Air Corps.
So that's how it came into our hands. And at that point, as we started that process, the next thing was then turning to Air Corps Aviation's historian, their in-house historian.
It's
Real
a
quick,
huge, massive.
This is Eric talking real quick
So,
about
he was a
the
colonel.
restoration. So,
I want to talk a little bit about the restoration. There's two guys over there, Eric and Eric, who had a lot to do with it. And hey, give me the highs, the lows. It was 8 years or so. Is that about right? How many years did it take?
Well, like Bruce said, we had the airplane at our shop for several years. We worked hard on it since we finished the restoration of Loeb's Hope, a P-51C model we restored. After that point, we worked hard on the P-47, and it's a huge, massive project. It's not a P-51, we can tell you that much. Lots of parts. There's over 40,000 parts in the P-47. That doesn't include the engine, the propeller, any of the instruments and things like that. And we have an amazing team at Air Corps. Lots of parts, of course, were fabricated for the restoration, but many parts were were reused from the original airplane. The team up on the screen there, and we've added several cents, and some people just have joined the team recently and got to experience the finish, and some of them have been through the whole project, and it's really a monumental task restoring an airplane. Every rivet in the airplane, every piece has been disassembled, and it's just amazing and exciting to see the airplane fly again for the first time and help tell the story. And we really get to tell more and hear more of the stories. So that's what it's all about.
I understand there's some signatures on it also.
So just a quick rundown on the project. And one of the things interesting about Air Corps, he talked about their growth, and about 80% of the employees at Air Corps are local from Bemidji, and most all of them have had no previous aviation experience. So it's a real testament to their training. They invest a lot of time in training, and they're a youthful company. They're, you know, my brother's 38, and he's the oldest guy there, which is kind of, there's interesting history on North American in World War II. A lot of people don't realize during World War II, companies like Curtiss and Lockheed and others had been around for years. North American was new to the game, and the government and people in the industry didn't really trust North American that much, what they could do. And they did have some engineers that had left other companies to make a risk, take a bet on a career at North American. So that's an interesting story too, maybe a subject for another talk later. And also, Air Corps 2 years ago acquired all the original plans from North American. An engineer named Ken Jungeberg was an engineer with originally North American and then Rockwell. He actually saved all of those plans from the incinerator, so that's another interesting story. And Air Corps has all those plans now, and they're not keeping it a secret. They are scanning everything for everybody out in the industry to be able to use. So it's all those plans will be out there, but it's a huge job. There's 2 rooms full of these plans that they're trying to get scanned and digitized so that restorers, operators, historians, youngsters doing models can take advantage of. So that's another interesting aspect of the business model. So that's really it in a nutshell. Again, it started from inspiration, from stories, and from histories of people that have gone before us, and the opportunity to be around people like you guys and airplanes to inspire this company to become what it is. So thank you to everybody that had a role in that. One guy that is in here, Terry Flower, he took over as a judge from Ron Vandervoort, and I actually had him as a judge for a couple of years towards the end of my 4-H career. So thank you, Terry. Any questions on anything at all? Yeah.
Will she be at Oshkosh this year?
Yeah, the question is, will she be at Oshkosh? And yes, it's slated to be at Oshkosh. It was just recently out at Granite Falls, and it didn't fly. That was for the D-Day commemoration on June 6th. It was real windy that day, so it only flew out. It actually did a couple nice passes, and then it went to an air show in St. Louis. But it is slated to be at Oshkosh. It lives in Minot, North Dakota, at the Dakota Aviation Museum part-time, and then part-time in Houston, Texas, where the owner, Bruce, resides. So, yeah.
What's the business model? How do you fund all this?
What is the business model? The business model is Air Corps doesn't own any of these airplanes. Most people that work there are interested in aviation, so they have their own airplanes, like smaller, more affordable ones like L4s or Stearman or stuff like that. But all of the projects are funded by private owners and or museums that come together to get the funds.
Where did the pay scheme for Bonnie come from? You're talking about specific
Yeah, so one interesting thing on that paint scheme is it has what we call the Pacific invasion stripes, which instead of 4, there's just 3. So they're stripes, but there's less of them than the European ones. And then, And then it had the red and white tail flash was just kind of a squadron thing that they had. So, yeah.
Are you doing the Parker course here?
No, not currently. So Airport typically has one major project that they're working on, which is currently a P-38 Lightning. So a couple of years you'll see that one on the scene. And then they usually do 2 components of other projects that other shops farm out to them. So they're working on a center section for a Tiger Cat, and they're working on a center section for a B-25. So they've got those 2 projects going. And then they will have 6 or 8 smaller, they call them learning projects for their new employees that are learning and practicing. And so if they make a mistake, it's not too expensive. So, yeah.
I have visited the Ezel down in Breckenridge. How many other airport Ezel restorers are there around the country?
The question is, how many other serious air restoration shops are there around the country? There's about 5 or 6 serious shops that's their main line of business. Aircorps also is not only doing historic aircraft restoration, since they have 3 facilities. They have a fabrication facility, an assembly facility off airport, and then at the airport they have a hangar. They're up to 20 or 30 projects that they've done or done parts of over the years now, so they have recurring maintenance that come back in the hangar. Yeah, there's 5 or 6 other serious shops that do the whole project, and there's 20 or 30, smaller component shops, wing builders, engine specialists, things like that. Yeah.
So do you ever go out to the west coast to go look at the old boneyards, because they're out in the desert and they've got a good humidity point where they don't rust?
Yeah.
Do you ever go out to those places to get your parts?
They have, yeah. Of course, most of those airplanes are newer.
Yeah.
They're only 20 to 40 years old versus 70, 80. But yeah, there are parts there. That's a question often asked. So where do you get your parts? Well, there's 5 or 10% of the parts are actual new old stock that actually are still wrapped in the box. Interesting factoid, you can get Allison engines still pretty prevalent, because after the war there were companies that made tractors and Caterpillars out of them. So there's still a lot of Allison parts out there. Merlin, different story. They're becoming rare, and people like Jack Roush have invested a lot in developing and creating life-limited parts for those engines. So thankfully there's people out there that have the passion to keep parts of components like that going. So yeah.
Any Rolls-Royce Merlins still running around?
Yeah, the problem is that Mustang owners will have 1 in the airplane and 4 on the shelf that are burned up. And again, it's getting the parts they need, for the engines. There's still lots of cores out there. Yeah.
What does it cost to restore body?
It's a secret, but my guess is between 7 and 15 million. Yeah. Even my brother won't tell me. Yeah, it's, Bruce is an amazing guy. This is his 8th or 9th major project, so he has a passion for, and bless him, he doesn't build something, put it in a hangar and not share it. Bonnie has already made 7 or 8 appearances this year, so if that takes multiple pilots to fly it and money to fill it with gas, he's doing that. So thank goodness for guys like him that have that passion to do that.
But Sean, the big thing
Say again?
Thanks to Fagan
Yeah.
and what he's doing.
Thanks to Ron too, same thing. Very generous people, yeah, yeah.
How many P-47s are flying?
Right now, there's like 3 or 4, depending on how you define flying, you know, airworthy or not. But this airplane is kind of neat because it was built by Republic, and of course Republic's main plant was on Long Island in New York, but they had a second plant in Evanston, Indiana, and that's where this airplane was built. And then after the war, I don't know how this worked, but International and Maytag together hired the plant to build refrigerators. So they built refrigerators for 2 different companies, which is interesting. And there was a P-47 that stood outside the gate of that factory for a long time. So, yeah. And this was a Dash 23, which was one of the latest models of the Razorback. And then very shortly after that, they went to the bubble top, just like the P-51 went from the C model Razorback to the bubble top. Yeah.
I got a glimpse of that guy, Jerry Keldon, who was a P-47 pilot.
Yeah, she's referring to at the very beginning when Eric stood up to his left on the other side of Eric Trueblood was Jerry, who was a P-47 pilot, New York guy, still has his New York accent, lives in Mexico now. He was a P-47 pilot in World War II, so it was an honor to have him there to talk about his exploits. But did you have more?
Well, I just wondered if he got in the plane.
Oh yeah, he sat in the airplane and then he came over to the tent after Warbirds in Review and was mobbed, of course, and then stuck around another 3 hours and sat on the golf cart and just told P-47 stories. So.
And as I understand, he was one of the very few Jewish P-47 pilots.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
They do tours up there.
Yeah, we like visitors. We're friendly up north, so come on up and we'll take you walleye fishing and we'll give you a tour of the factory, I'm starting to say. I used to go up there and there would be 1 or 2 people that I didn't recognize that were newly hired. And now I joke that I go up there and there's only 2 people I recognize. Everyone else is brand new. So they're growing a lot, and just check in, just call, and they take Fridays off typically. So there are people around on Fridays that can give you a tour if Friday's a better day for you. But yeah, they're very happy to share what they're doing with the interested people. So maybe we could do a field trip. Anything else? All right, thanks a lot, guys.